everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is Repeat Ron, and today we're going to have another discussion video. This is going to be about Engineers Overclocks, my opinions on them, and we're also going to be going through the pick rates. The pick rates are from update 34 though, so this is before the new primary weapons were added. We don't have any information, at least that I'm aware of, on the stats of how often the new weapons are picked and what overclocks are picked a lot, so I'm going to be speculating on some of them. And I'm going to be offering suggestions on how I would either buff or potentially change, or in some cases maybe even nerf certain overclocks. Today we're going to be talking about the Engineer, and let's begin with their primary weapons. First up, we have the Warthog Auto Shotgun, which has a pretty good selection of overclocks that are picked pretty often to one another. The lowest picked overclock for the Warthog, as of this, was Stunner, which isn't really that surprising for me, but it's still picked almost 12% of the time. So it's still not underpicked compared to some of the other overclocks that we've seen when we were talking about Driller. The most picked is Magnetic Pelt Alignment, the balanced overclock, with 26.5%. So that's not that far apart from one another, since everything's going to fall in between 12% and 26%. First up with Stunner, with its 12%. Stunner lets you stun enemies more often and lets you deal 30% more damage when enemies are stunned. This overclock I sort of have a problem with, but not necessarily because I think it's bad or anything, but it's just not super interesting in my opinion. I wish it did a little bit more, rather than just having percent chance of stunning and doing more damage to stunned enemies. I'm not exactly sure what else you could give this, but I feel like it needs a little bit of a buff in some way. Maybe make it so it also has blow-through rounds or something like that. That might make it a little bit too strong, but maybe just has one extra penetration. I feel like that would be okay, where your pelt can potentially punch through another enemy and stun multiple enemies. That way you really are stunning more of them. But aside from that, I don't really have any complaints about Stunner. For our second clean overclock, we have the lightweight magazines. This one I think is great. This one gives you more max ammo and faster reload speed, two things that the Warthog shotgun greatly benefits from. This one has a 13.5% pick rate, so a bit higher than Stunner. Honestly, I figured this one would be a little bit higher than it is, because this one works really well. It's very flexible. I feel like this one could have a buff to it, but I honestly don't think it needs it. Like, maybe give it another little bit of ammo, like 6 more shots or something like that. So it goes up to 24 total ammo. The reload speed is great, and the max ammo is really nice, so I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to extra ammo, but I think it's fine the way that it is. For our balanced overclock, we have Magnetic Pelt Alignment. This gives us 50% less base spread, more weak spot damage, and a slower rate of fire. If you take rate of fire, which is a pretty popular option for the Warthog, it makes up for this entirely. And it's quite accurate. It lets you do extra damage. For balanced overclock, I think this is fine. I think the rate of fire decrease is okay, even though you usually go with increased rate of fire, or at least the most popular options are increased rate of fire for the Warthog. So I don't really have a problem with this one at all. I think it's pretty well done. Then for unstable overclocks, we have Cycle Overload. This gives us more damage per pellet, increased rate of fire, but longer reload speeds and more spread, which I think is a fair trade-off because the damage isn't overwhelming. The rate of fire can be overwhelming if you go full rate of fire, but the reload speed isn't that big of a nerf, nor is the base spread all that bad. It is once you get out to longer ranges, but realistically you're not going to be using the Warthog at very long ranges unless you have Magnetic Pelt Alignment, or maybe you're going with choke in tier 2 and like lightweight cases or something like that, or lightweight magazines. So that doesn't really hinder the shotgun all that much, and it increases its base damage for I think a pretty fair trade-off. So again, no problem with Cycle Overload. And then our last unstable overclock is mini shells. A lot of extra ammo, a lot of magazine size, and 50% reduction in recoil, but we do lose out on damage and we can no longer stun enemies. The stun can matter, especially on higher difficulties where stunning enemies is really important, especially if you want to hit slashers or if you need to hit tri-jaws that can pose immediate threats to you. Same thing with acid spitters. But the shotgun already didn't have super consistent stunning unless you chose Stunner. So it's not too bad. This does turn the shotgun, at least in my opinion, more of into a general purpose weapon. I didn't even say the stats on these. Sorry, Cycle Overload. Well, I guess Magnetic Pelt Alignment had the 26.5. Cycle Overload has 25, almost 26%. And then Mini Shells has a 22% pick rate. And Mini Shells does affect your breakpoints with the shotgun, where if you just take it and you're not running damage on the shotgun, you can no longer one-shot headshot grunts. You do have to take both the damage options in Tier 2 and in Tier 3, which I think is a pretty fair trade-off for it. It is a fairly flexible overclock, though. You can build it however you'd like. Even without damage, it works pretty well. And overall, I think the Warthog Auto Shotgun's overclocks are pretty well designed. I wouldn't say any of them are underpowered or necessarily overpowered. I think they're all good. The main problem that I have with the Warthog Auto Shotgun's overclocks is that we only have 5 of them, where every other weapon, or almost every other weapon, has 6 to 7 overclocks. So I really feel like the Warthog should get an extra overclock or two, give it another balanced one, and then give it maybe another clean, or another balanced one, or another... You could do really whatever if you wanted to add a 7th one. I feel like that would be a big help to the Warthog, but overall the Warthog I think is great, and overclocks are also pretty solid. So let's move on to Stubby. And Stubby's percentage picks are all over the place. Way off from like what the Warthog had. Our top picked overclock for the Stubby is Refire Booster. This has almost a 50% pick rate. It has a 49.5% pick rate, so pretty much half of all engineers running around with overclocks are probably going to be running this one. And then the least picked overclock is Well-Oiled Machine, the clean one, at only 3.33%. So that is a pretty low percentage pick rate for this one, which I think is actually pretty decent. So let's talk about them. The first one is Super Slim Rounds. This one has a 4% pick rate, so also pretty low. This one gives you extra magazine size and reduces your base spread, both of which are pretty nice. Stubby with reduced spread, it actually is pretty accurate out to most ranges. The extra magazine size is always going to be a bonus, and this is nothing but a bonus for any build that you want to run with Stubby. So if you want to run an electric build, if you want to run a damage build, if you want to run full ammo build Stubby, they all help with that. So to make this one potentially more appealing, I feel like it might just need its stats buffed a little bit. Like instead of 20% increased spread, maybe give it 30 or 35% or something, so it's fairly accurate. Or maybe give the magazine size a bit more, like maybe go up to 10 or 15 rounds. I feel like then it might get picked a little bit more. Then we have Well-Oiled Machine, which increases our rate of fire by 2 and decreases our reload speed by 0.2 seconds. That's pretty nice, and Well-Oiled Machine I think is actually pretty well designed. It's just it's kind of outshined by the Refire Booster, if you want to compare the two, directly. And Refire Booster I think is the one that kind of needs to be changed. I honestly don't think Well-Oiled Machine needs to be changed all that much. I think this is fine the way that it is. The Refire Booster, which I said almost had a 50% pick rate, and this one gives you 2 more electric damage and 4 more rate of fire, but increases your base spread by 50%. This one, even though it is the most picked, I don't necessarily think Refire Booster is overpowered. It guarantees electric damage per shot, which makes it so an electric build works really well for it. It increases your rate of fire, which makes it so a damage build also works really well for it. Assuming you're not mixing the two together, which would also work. And the 50% more spread is honestly not that big of a deal. You're probably not using Stubby at super long ranges anyway. You're probably using it at close to medium range. So increasing its base spread, you'll still hit most of your shots. You may miss 1 or 2 more than you already would. But when you're firing out 4 more rounds per second than you normally would, that doesn't really matter. And your rounds are doing bonus damage. So honestly, I don't know if I'd really change Refire Booster to make it something else. If so, I feel like it would have to be some other nerf besides the base spread. But again, I don't think that this really needs a nerf. I think it's okay. You know what you could do, actually, is give Well-Oiled Machine 1 more electric damage guaranteed. And just have it be a less damage-oriented version of the Refire Booster, but without coming with the negative side of losing accuracy. That might be a decent buff to give Well-Oiled Machine. And make it competitive with like Refire Booster if you're going for more of like a kind of traditional submachine gun build of just spraying it at anything. Then we have Lightweight Rounds. Lightweight Rounds has an 8% pick rate, so still kind of low, but this one increases your maximum ammo by 180, reduces your direct damage by 1, and reduces your rate of fire by 2. This one I think is pretty balanced, and it works well for the builds that you usually want to take with it, which is like really low ammo count builds. So if you're running like full damage on a nuke build, or if you're running full damage on a return to sender build or something like that, usually you're pairing this one with a secondary that's consuming a lot of ammo. and isn't the most ammo efficient in the first place. So this can kind of make up for it, so at least you have bullets to deal with all the regular enemies that you're not using your very specialized weapon for. And for that, I think it's fine. I don't think this one really needs to be changed. And then for unstable overclocks, we have Turret Arc, which has a 12.8% pick rate. This one's an interesting one, because this revolves around your turrets. You have to shoot your turrets and you have to electrify them, and then they'll deal damage to every enemy around them, as well as they will complete an arc if you fire at both your turrets, and they're within a certain distance from one another. I also found out recently that this doesn't matter if it goes through walls and stuff. I figured that it did, but you can just have it linked through that. It's probably not going to hit anything in the walls, but it can work that way. This one can be good if you can kite enemies around your turrets and really play around them. I think this works better for solo than it does multiplayer, and even in solo it tends to kind of take a while, so I don't take Turret Arc all that much. But I think that it's okay for what it does, because its downsides are we lose maximum ammo and we lose rate of fire. Our upsides are that we potentially get pylons that zap everything around them and deal a little bit more damage and slow down. So if you like that playstyle, I think it's perfectly balanced. If you don't like that playstyle, I completely understand, but at least it does change up the way that you use Stubby. And I like that it incorporates other parts of the Engineer's arsenal into how you use them too. And then our last unstable overclock is Turret Em Discharge. This makes it so whenever we shoot our turret and apply the electric status to them, then our turret will explode out, dealing damage and fearing all enemies within, a 5-meter radius. This also slows down all enemies hit by it. We lose out on direct damage and we lose out on magazine size. The losses here aren't that bad. It does make it so Stubby's not really that great for just firing directly at enemies, but it will still work for just regular grunts and even up to like slashers and guards and stuff like that. You can still just spray at them, but the more efficient way of using this is to keep hitting your turrets and keep dealing damage over time. This also doesn't really have that much of a cooldown between each of the shots, so you can trigger it pretty often, and since it does apply a slow status effect that is pretty useful for the team, it is very easy to hit teammates with this, including yourself, because the area is surprisingly large, but you're not doing that much damage, so even on Has 5, you're not hurting your teammates all that much. The extra fear is pretty nice too from it, because you can scare away some of the larger enemies that are coming near your turrets, and of course, if you combine this with something like your lure grenade, then you can constantly be zapping enemies that are getting into the center of that. It also is probably one of the most ammo efficient overclocks for Stubby in general, because you're not using that much ammo to hit your turrets. That being said, it's still not a playstyle that's for everybody. This one has a 22.3% pick rate, so one of the higher ones, but I understand why this one gets picked about that, and I feel like it's fine the way that it is. It can be strong, and if you are patient and you do like to micromanage, if you like to build a lot of strategy around your build, then it can be really strong. If you don't and you just want to shoot stuff, then this probably isn't the overclock for you. And then we have the Lock 1 Smart Rifle, or the Low-Key Smart Rifle, or the Lock On Smart Rifle, however you want to call it. This one is Engineer's newest primary weapon, and I really like it. I think it's a really cool weapon. For the overclocks, I'm not sure which one I would say is the least picked. I'm thinking that one of the clean overclocks is probably the least picked. I'm probably betting on armor breaking module, but I could be wrong at that. I don't know. That's just purely speculation. The most picked, I'm thinking, is probably going to either be the explosive chemical rounds or the executioner. So for these, we have the armor breaking module. When we are at full locks, all of our bullets have pretty much the max amount of armor breaking that they can have. That's pretty good. I think that's a perfectly fine clean overclock, because we don't have armor breaking anywhere else on the Loki, so it isn't like a redundant trait to take or has a redundant mod to take for it. It's going to be good if you don't really care about curving your bullets around enemies. So if you just want to hit a Praetorian in the face, you can just break through its armor, or if you maybe lift a little bit up to try to hit its back, it's going to be a little bit easier for that. And yeah, it's going to give you more damage regardless. I think it's fine as a clean overclock. I don't really have any problems with it. Then we have Eraser. This increases our magazine size and increases our maximum number of locks. Both these are bonuses. If you like hitting multiple enemies with the locks, then that's great. Even if you plan on using all the locks each time, you should be able to do that, as long as you don't take like the smart targeting system, because otherwise that might make it so you're not hitting your maximum amount of locks. And the extra magazine size is pretty nice. Maybe one bonus to this one would give it a little bit more ammo, like just in its spare amount of ammo, not even that much. You could just give it 12 like what Executioner takes away. Secret Rounds makes it so you can lock onto a target and your rate of fire is slower once you're locked on, but your shots can pass through pretty much anything and ignore armor. This one's really strong on Dreadnought missions, at least if you get the regular Dreadnought and in the last phase of the Hive Guard. It's really nice against Oppressors. It's really nice against Praetorians. It doesn't really come with that much of a downside. The lower rate of fire isn't that bad, and the reduced reload speed is pretty neglectable. You can reload cancel the Smart Rifle pretty well, so messing with its reload speed doesn't matter that much. It's mostly the burst rate of fire. I think Secret Rounds is really well made. I don't really have that much of a problem with it. I think the trade-off for it is pretty fair. Then we have Explosive Chemical Rounds, which Explosive Chemical Rounds is pretty awesome if you build it for like 3-round bursts. If you want to use the gun as a 3-round burst gun, then Explosive Chemical Rounds is really good. If you're still locking on to like all the enemies at once, it's going to feel kind of underwhelming. So Explosive Chemical Round makes it so once you put 3 locks onto a target, the last shot, however many shots that might be, will trigger an explosion on the enemy, dealing damage to them and to all enemies around them. This also can fear all enemies, which is very nice. But this is in exchange for us losing out on 5 of our direct damage and losing out on 36 ammo. Even though you're losing out on ammo, every 3rd shot explodes and deals damage to everything around it, as well as can fear all enemies. So you can clear out waves pretty fast with this. It works really well on single targets, and usually you want to go with the macro lens so you have very long range. The main thing that you're trying to accomplish with this is just put 3 locks on a target and then let it go. That's how you're going to get the most amount of damage, so try not to lock onto everything that you can. So I think this one is really strong, but with a specific build. Without that specific build and just by itself, I think that the Overclock is fine, because it does limit you as to how you want to use the gun, but it makes up for it in its versatility, I guess, where it works against pretty much everything. So I don't really have a problem with Explosive Chemical Rounds. I think it's a really strong Overclock, so I guess I'll just move on from that one. Next we have Executioner, which gives you 50% more weak spot damage when you're at full locks. We also have an increase in lock-on speed, but we lose out on 12 ammo, 12 magazine size, and we also lose out on the maximum number of locks, which is considered a downside to the Executioner, but when 2 of your options in tier 5 give you either more damage or a fear chance when you hit full locks, it's not really that much of a downside because you're just getting to those locks faster. So you're getting your damage quicker or you're getting your fear faster than you already would. I honestly don't know if there's anything really wrong with Executioner though. The reduction in ammo and magazine size is not that significant. I'm not sure what I would really change about it, if I would change anything at all. I think it's okay where it is. Then our last overclock is Neuro Lasso, which this one's an odd one. This one makes it so for each lock you have on an enemy, it slows it by 10%, but in exchange, you can't lock onto a target as long, and it takes a little bit longer to lock onto targets. This one works pretty well as a support weapon, and it does slow things down, sometimes a significant amount, sometimes just a little bit. Slowdowns are always nice on pretty much any difficulty. It makes it easier for you to clean up enemies, and this one doesn't come at that much of a downside. Having a slightly faster lock-on speed, or a slightly slower lock-on speed, isn't too detrimental, and only being able to hold that lock on for 6 seconds, once you get used to holding it onto an enemy for like 5 seconds and then letting go, isn't really that hard to get used to. This also doesn't come at any detriment to any of your other stats. You're not losing out on ammo, you're not losing out on damage. Granted, you're not really gaining damage or you're not really gaining ammo, but the upside is still there, and it's kind of nice. It's a very odd overclock, though, so I wouldn't really be surprised if Neuro Lasso also had a fairly low pick rate, just because it's kind of weird, especially the way that it works. Then let's move on to the secondaries, where we do have some stats to talk about. So first up, we have the 40mm PGL, the grenade launcher for Engineer, and the most picked overclock for this one is Hyper Propellant with 32%, which is, yeah, pretty high, kind of what I would expect, though. And the lowest picked overclock is the compact rounds, giving you more ammo but less damage and less AoE at 5% pick rate. So there is some disparity there. For our clean overclocks, we have Clean Sweep, and Clean Sweep has a 16.6% pick rate. This gives you extra AoE damage and a larger AoE. For a clean overclock, I really don't have much to say about this one. I think it's fine. Extra damage, extra AoE for a grenade launcher makes a lot of sense. Then we have Pack Rat with a 9% pick rate. This is probably one of the most basic overclocks in the entire game, with just giving you 2 more total ammo. I think this one and RJ250, I think, are the reason why Compact Rounds has such a low pick rate. I don't think that there's anything wrong with Pack Rat. I would maybe change it by giving it one additional thing, like maybe it gives you a 0.2 second faster reload or something like that. You know, something that's not going to matter all that much, but might feel a little bit nice and might just be more than just 2 ammo. For Compact Rounds, we do have that 5% pick rate. This gives us 5 more ammo, minus 10 area damage, minus 0.5 AoE radius. The downsides for this one really aren't that bad, and the upside is pretty nice. 5 extra ammo is good, and you'll make up more damage and potentially more AoE damage with this just because you have more shots. I think the main problem with compact ammo is that it's another ammo mod when you have 2 other ammo mods like Pack Rat and like RJ250. If you wanted to have the most amount of rounds, then going with RJ250 would make sense, as well as RJ250 gives you a lot of utility. So that might be one reason why you would take that over compact rounds. And Pack Rat gives you more flexibility with you just getting the 2 extra ammo. So there's no downside to it whatsoever. You're not getting as much ammo as you would with compact rounds or with RJ250. But you're not getting any sort of downside whatsoever with it. So it might just be more appealing in that regard to more people. I think that this one's interesting just because we have 3 ammo choices to pick from, and it's just the least picked ammo choice. It's similar to some of our other things that we've talked about, where we have like multiple rate of fire choices, or multiple ammo choices, or multiple damage choices, and there's always going to be one that's going to be the least picked out of the 2 or 3 that we have. Next up, we have RJ250. This one has a 14% pick rate. This one gives you more ammo and a faster reload speed, but we lose out on area damage. We also gain the ability to rocket jump, so we can fling ourselves or we can fling friends around the map. This one does give Engineer the most amount of mobility that they can get, because it's the only thing that really affects your mobility for Engineer. The amount of damage that you lose is not super significant. You'll still be able to kill crowds pretty effectively with this. The extra utility is always nice to have. I don't really have any problem with RJ250. It's super fun, and I think it's pretty well balanced. Then we move on to our unstables, where we got Fatboy, which has a 22.5% pick rate. Not too surprising, this one gives us way more area damage, a larger AoE radius, but we cut our ammo down significantly, we cut our velocity down significantly. We do get a radiation cloud with our nukes though, when we fire them. I don't think that this one really needs to be changed either. The downsides are really significant with Fatboy. It's not really that advisable to just build straight damage for it. It can be fun, but usually it's better to go with like ammo, and to make this just a big area denial weapon. You can also technically use this for mining too, which is fun. Not very ammo efficient, but fun. So I think Fatboy's fine where it is, really. And then we have Hyper Propellant. This increases our direct damage and increases our projectile velocity pretty extensively, but we lose out on AoE radius, so our explosion radius is extremely small, and we lose out on ammo. This one is really strong because it turns your grenade launcher into a railgun, more or less. You can snipe things all the way across the map and usually one-hit kill stuff, but it does come at the cost of you no longer having really any area damage, and your ammo is cut down. You can make up for the ammo by going with extra ammo, and that's usually the best. But you don't want to try to build up that area damage anymore, because it's still not going to help out a whole lot with this. I don't think Hyper Propellant also really needs to be changed. It makes the gun very specialized at doing just one particular job, and it makes it so it can no longer do the regular job that it was sort of meant to do, where it was usually good at dealing with crowds. Now it's really good at dealing with single targets, even at very long ranges. So I think that one's okay, and I wouldn't be surprised if Hyper Propellant's popularity actually went down since the Lock 1 got introduced, because that's another long-range option where Engineer didn't really have much of a long-range option before that. Moving on to the Breach Cutter, where we have 7 overclocks. So the most picked overclock for the Breach Cutter is the High Voltage Crossover, which is honestly kind of surprising to me, with a 24% pick rate. The least picked is not really that surprising to me, and that is Roll Control with a 2% pick rate. So pretty significant drop there. So for our clean overclocks, we have Lightweight Cases. Lightweight Cases has a 19.8% pick rate overall. This gives you extra ammo and a faster reload speed. This one's fantastic. It's, in my opinion, one of the strongest overclocks for the Breach Cutter, just because it gives you more ammunition, and the Breach Cutter is pretty scary as it is. So letting it have even more ammo is just really nice. The reload speed doesn't really matter because you're likely running born ready with the breach cutter. This one's really good. I don't think it really needs to be changed. Roll control is another overclock that I honestly don't think needs to be changed, even though it has an extremely low pick rate at only 2.48%. So this one makes it so that you can spin the breach cutter line as much as you would like, so long as you hold down the trigger when you fire it. That does make it very interesting to use. It's kind of arguable as to how effective that is in combat situations. I think that it can be a little bit of a buff to the gun. Maybe not a significant difference to the gun, but a little bit of a buff to the gun where you can start out shooting, and maybe if you wanted to correct your shot a bit more or more enemies spawned, you could hit them a little bit better. And you can also use it pretty effectively on like escort missions to hit enemies on the walls. It's definitely going to be a weird one, and one that doesn't really come with necessarily any benefit, but it doesn't necessarily come with any downside either. So I think it's fine the way that it is, even with its very low pick rate. I think that that's okay. Then we have stronger plasma current. This gives us more damage and a longer projectile life. This has a 10.4% pick rate. And this one is pretty fun to use. You don't need damage on the breach cutter at all, but you know, it's not bad to have, so I think this one's perfectly fine. The extra lifetime is pretty nice. Extra DPS is fun to use, so no complaints there. Then for our bounced overclocks, we have Return to Sender. This one has a 15.8% pick rate. This one's an interesting one. When you fire your breach cutter shot out, you can then recall it back to you, potentially getting 2 shots out of every 1 shot with the breach cutter. We do lose overall maximum ammo though, and our maximum ammo is cut in half more or less, so the downsides are there. Again, you don't necessarily need extra damage on the breach cutter, but this does do a bit more, especially to larger targets. If you can get it like to go through a dreadnought and then come back through it, you can rack up a good amount of damage. You can do the same thing with an oppressor or Praetorian or whatever it might be. I don't think that there's anything wrong with Return to Sender, and I think that it's a cool mechanic to have for the gun. High Voltage Crossover has our highest pick rate at 24.2%, which is very odd. This gives us a 100% chance to electrocute enemies, dealing damage over time, but our magazine size is cut down. Now, if you take the larger magazine in Tier 1, it's not really all that significant, and adding electric damage to our guns is nice. It can synergize, I guess, with Stubby if you wanted to do that. It could also synergize well with a scout with Zukovs or with like Bullets of Mercy in their GK2 or something like that. Not really much of a downside here, but it could be argued as to how much of an upside this one really is, because the breach cutter is likely cutting through most things and killing them very quick. Adding the little bit of electric damage afterwards is more of a status effect thing to potentially synergize well with other weapons. So it's not really a downside, and the magazine size cut down isn't really much of a downside either. I don't know. I think I'm okay with High Voltage Crossover. I'm kind of surprised it was the most picked overclock for the breach cutter though. That seems a little bit odd. And then we've got Spitting Death, which is the second most picked overclock. I kind of understand this one a bit more. This one has a 22.7% pick rate. This one makes it so we don't have nearly as much ammo, and our breach cutter does significantly less damage, but our line is increased as well as the duration is increased, and it spins around like a blender, chopping everything up. This one is a pure spectacle to watch, and it's pretty good at holding areas. It's also really good if you can put it on just one enemy and keep it there, but the downsides of it are all pretty significant. So I think that this one's really well designed. I think the downsides really make you consider how you want to use this, and it definitely benefits good positioning over just spamming out shots with the breach cutter. It will actually more punish that if you're doing that way. Then we have Inferno, which is the second least picked overclock, at least as of this. I think that Inferno might have gotten more picked, at least I would assume it did after the new weapons got added. Inferno cuts down our overall damage with the breach cutter, and it also cuts down on our armor breaking ability, but it makes it so our shots are pretty much guaranteed to ignite anything that they hit, dealing pretty high fire damage overall. This stacks really well with the Loki because there is a mod that the Loki can have that gives it 20% more damage when an enemy is electrocuted or on fire, or both. Those do stack together, so that did make it a nice addition to Engineer's arsenal, as well as we do have the robots now, which are weak to fire. Now, it's kind of hard to light them on fire with the Inferno breach cutter because robots do tend to move around, at least the flying ones. It's not too bad if you're just shooting at the turrets, but the breach cutter will cut through them, no problem. It was also, I guess, indirectly buffed at the start of the newest patch because the breach cutter was bugged and didn't have any armor breaking on it, so reducing its armor breaking didn't matter whatsoever. That was kind of an oversight though, and it's been fixed now. So the breach cutter does have armor breaking, but I wonder if Inferno was picked more for that first little while when that was bugged. I think Inferno was pretty well made too. It definitely works better if you have a team or a setup that will synergize with fire. It's honestly one of the weaker ones without it, but even so, it's still not bad for the breach cutter. It's more for crowd control rather than large targets. And overall, I don't think I really have any problems with any of the breach cutter overclocks. I think that they're all really well designed and that they all have something to offer, even if it's something kind of wacky and different like spinning death or roll control. It's still kind of nice that there is different ways to use the weapon rather than just increase to damage or something like that. I mean, it does have that too. So this was Engineers Overclocks. For the most part, I don't really have a problem with a lot of Engineers Overclocks. Give the shotgun more overclocks. I think it needs it. And maybe buff some of Stubby's or kind of move around some of Stubby's overclocks because they seem to be the most just out of whack. Other than that, like Loki, grenade launcher, breach cutter, and the shotgun's overclocks were all very good. Even a lot of Stubbies are really good. It's just some of them are a lot better than others. Tell me your thoughts on Engineers Overclocks too down in the comments below. I would like to see what you guys think. What you feel maybe needs to be buffed or nerfed or rebalanced or maybe changed around entirely. Thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. And special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube and my patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this. And if you'd like to be a part of that, there is links down in the description. Thanks everybody who does that. It really helps out the channel. I hope you guys have a great day. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!